Okay, we're out checking some cattle that we treated with AML on Thursday, and today's Saturday. So these are some university cattle. We're gonna be following them to be checking to see if we have any resistance, pyrethroid resistance built up in the cattle. We haven't seen any or very little pyrethroid resistance out here in the West, but we have gotten a couple reports recently of pyrethroid resistance up in North Dakota on some farms that have some fairly serious, maybe less than a week of control with the AML product. I don't think that's going to be a problem here, but we're going to be checking them over the next few days. And these are the cattle that we had the video of that you saw a little earlier that had the flies just swarming all around them. And it looks like we don't have hardly any flies on her. So once again, 2 days ago is when they were treated. Okay, we don't have any flies. Now these calves were treated with a spray-on pyrethroid, which should last a few days, which would have knocked the flies down, but we wouldn't expect too many flies on these calves anyway, as most of them are still suckling. One of the advantages we've got this year is that we do have the new AIM-A product, the abamectin, that we can treat cattle with if we do have pyrethroid resistance, and we'll be using that as a follow-up treatment on these cattle probably in about 5 or 6 weeks when the flies come back. Then we'll be coming back out rotating from the orange AML capsules, and we will be then treating them with the green abamectin capsules. The new abamectin product is in the avermectin class of products, so it's very similar to Ivomec and Dectomax. Okay. All right, we're going to go over and check the ones on the other side. Okay, the other thing we want to look at when we're checking the cattle is the cattle behavior, and I think you'll notice from difference from 2 days ago when these cattle were covered with flies. It was pretty obvious they were pretty miserable, throwing their heads, really dusty, swishing their tails a lot, trying to get the flies off of them. And you notice today that there's really no tail activity going on. They're not bothered by flies in the least little bit. So these cattle are looking really good. I mean, as you can see, there's just a few flies swarming around their heads, but not very many at all. So we expect from the AML product. Flies are gone and they stay gone. With the new avermectin products, with our abamectin AML treatments, that does respond a little bit differently. Initially when we put the product on, they are definitely a topical application, and so the flies are killed and off of the cattle very quickly. However, after about 4 or 5 days, you'll start to see flies coming back onto the cattle. And if you check them, say in the morning or in the evening, at one of those times, you're probably going to see quite a few flies on the cattle about 5 days after treatment until about 10 to 14 days after treatment. And that's a result of the new flies that are hatched every day and keep coming back to the cattle. And so it'll look like the product's not working, but you have to at that point look at the cattle behavior, because we see a lot of those flies on the cows, but the flies aren't necessarily biting the cattle. And so you'll see flies, but you won't see the typical behavior of the cows fighting the flies. They won't be throwing their heads, they won't be swishing their tails. They'll be pretty calm. They'll act like the flies aren't even there. And part of that is when the abamectin is put on the cattle, it's absorbed after the first 2 or 3 days. There's still some topical application, but after 2 or 3 days, the blood levels of the abamectin will be high enough that the horn flies will be killed when they take their first blood meal. So that's why, and it takes a little bit for the abamectin to kill the flies. So you'll see a lot of flies on the cattle, but you won't see the flies biting the cattle. So they can't bite anymore, and then they'll be on the cows but not really bother them. So that's the flies. It'll look like there's quite a few flies there, and there are. I've told people it's kind of a phase where the flies are dead, but they don't know it yet. I was corrected in my English and should be saying that the flies are dying and they just don't know it yet. I've had a couple people, my experience has been that if I check the cattle in the morning and see a lot of flies, if I go back and check them that evening, most all of the flies will be completely gone. Depending on what your weather's like, the hatch may be later in the day, and so you may see flies in the evening in the cattle, but if you check them the next morning, pretty typically those flies are no longer going to be bothering the cattle. So yeah, but these cattle look completely clean. We'll be watching them for any resistance problems, but our thought is out here we don't have a lot of resistance in horn flies to the pyrethroid, so we're expecting to get a pretty good coverage on these cattle, and we'll be able to keep an eye on them every couple days, and we'll add to this video so you can see how the product's working. Okay.